Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Megan Figueroa.
And I'm Carrie Gillen. And we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. So once again, we have a Patreon now. And last month, our new patrons.
Yeah.
We'd like to thank you individually. So I'm not sure if people want me to use their last names, but I think... So in December, when I first put it up, I didn't say originally that we were going to thank people individually, and so I wasn't sure. But this time, I said it, so hopefully it's okay if I use full names. Mm-hmm. Please let me know if that's not the case.
Yeah.
And I apologize. But so Alyssa Crowley, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Talk the Talk, another podcast about linguistics. I know. So if you guys are interested in Ling Pods, as I like to call them, that's another one that you should check out.
Yeah. Hashtag LingPods. Is that a hashtag?
It should be.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's start it.
Okay. All right.
If it doesn't already exist. I'm just assuming it doesn't.
It seems like it would be some sort of creature that would be under the sea.
Yes. And then Ben Whedon, thank you also. And Chris Hengler, all the way from Hamburg.
Oh!
Yes. And also a former professor of mine from Toronto, Elizabeth Cowper. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's so nice. I don't see any professors of mine. I'm just kidding.
That's funny. Oh, and related to the Patreon, we have a new bonus episode that's going to be up soon where Alberto Rios, my former colleague, reads one of his poems. So you get an extra poem.
From the Poet Laureate of Arizona. And it's awesome because it's a poem that is actually at the port of entry at Nogales, Sonora, Nogales, Arizona. So it's very cool. Y'all should really get on the Patreon if you want to hear all these cool bonus eppies.
Oh, dear. I think that makes you the Shoshana of this this podcast. So, before we really begin, I also want to apologize for my voice right now. I don't know if you can tell, but it sounds much deeper to me because yesterday we went to a housewarming party, which was lovely. But it was very loud, so to talk over the music means I'm just a little hoarse.
Yeah, your little introverted voice got all tired.
I'm not as introverted as I used to be.
Yeah. Wait, didn't you see Hamilton yesterday?
Yeah, we saw that in the afternoon.
Yeah.
By the way, BT
so
dubs.
gel.
It does live up to the hype.
Yeah,
I was a little
jealous.
worried because, I mean, there's a lot of times where things don't live up to the hype to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, Wonder Woman, I was like, But this, definitely, I was like, no. It deserves every accolade it's ever gotten.
Well, another one that you actually agree lived up to the hype was Black Panther.
Mm-hmm. Also amazing.
Yeah. I am still thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I love Princess Shuri. And I love everything that I'm seeing on Twitter, all the fan art and the STEM, the science, technology, engineering. What does the STEM stand for?
You're almost there. Science, technology,
and
engineering, and math. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I always say that I'm like really into STEM, but do I know what it means? Yeah, no, that's right. It is STEM.
Well, now there's also STEAM, which adds the art.
Which, yes, I love the arts. It should always be in there. Do we really have math without art? I don't think so.
I mean, there's math that I guess it always is kind of arty at some level, but you don't know until you see it visualized some way, I guess, or like unless you're a really good mathematician, you can't see. But yeah, so I really, and also Black Panther involves the arts as well. Like, oh my god, that costuming.
Oh my god, I know.
One of the outfits was like this onesie sort of, or a jumpsuit, and I was like, I wish I could wear that.
Right. I know.
I'm too practical though. If you can't pee in it.
I mean, you could.
Yeah, exactly.
So, also related to Black Panther, but it's no fault of Black Panther, Niall DeMarco, the very handsome deaf model that is an advocate for the deaf community and for ASL, I would say, right? He was tweeting about how he went to go see Black Panther, but the captioning was just so horrible. It was skipping lines that he had to leave. So it's one of those things where I realized that I have a privilege that I wasn't thinking about.
Yeah, and I think, to be clear, it was a technological issue, so it wasn't on the main screen. He had like some kind of some piece of tech that he stuck into the chair in front of him, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that was not functioning very well. So, I mean, the captioning still could have been missing lines if it had been on the screen, but it was, the piece of technology was not working fully. I think that was part of the problem. But you're right. Yeah, of course we have this privilege of being able to hear lines. And one of the times that I really noticed that actually it wasn't about being deaf or hard of hearing, but something that's related. So me having a privilege was watching movies with someone who was a second language learner of English. And he really strongly preferred having the captions on, the subtitles on, because he could get more of the English that way. And it hadn't occurred to me that, of course, that would be helpful for someone like that. So it was a similar kind of thing. So he's advocating, I think, for like actual captions on the main screen. Yeah. And I think, bare minimum, why not just have some special screenings where that actually, like, once a day at least? I don't know.
Yeah. He wrote something for Teen Vogue. So let's link to that when we have in our Tumblr for this episode.
Right. Oh, yes. Gotta make sure we have that.
So let's all examine our privilege and also go see Black Panther and enjoy that. Everyone's beautiful in it. Just it's eye candy, the entire movie. And I don't mean it by just the people. I mean, like, it's such a beautiful movie.
It really is. Oh yeah, and there's also one language related thing to talk about with Black Panther, and that's the use of Xhosa. I don't know. That's not how you pronounce it, but it's a language that actually is spoken in South Africa. So some people don't like that because Wakanda is in the central part of Africa, and so some people were complaining about that. But I'm like, well, it's a fictional country, so they can have whatever language they want, and it's kind of nice to hear that language being spoken. So.
Yeah. All right. So today we are talking to Ichazo Rodriguez Ordóñez about Basque, which, again, another week where Megan learns everything that she didn't know. It's getting kind of embarrassing, Carrie.
Well, I mean, you had a lot less to learn about Chicano English than I did.
Oh, I really appreciate that bone you just threw to me. All right, should we get into it?
Yes, let's get into it.
Today we are very excited to welcome Ichazo Rodriguez Ordóñez. She is an assistant professor of Spanish and linguistics at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. She received her PhD in Hispanic linguistics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2016. Her research focuses on contact situations. She incorporates linguistic attitudes and ideologies to explain contact-induced change. Most of her work pertains to the Basque Spanish contact situation in Spain. More recently, she has also focused on contact effects in the linguistic landscapes of Spanish and English in Pilsen, Chicago. Welcome, Ichazo.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here.
Hi. So I guess we'll just begin with Basque, because I'm assuming many of our listeners do not know what Basque even is.
Yeah.
So first of all, I would like to say that I'm very excited to be here, especially to talk about one of my mother tongues, with which I identify very, very closely. So talking about Basque for me is always excitement and pleasure. So what is Basque? Well, Basque is an isolated language spoken in the north of Spain and south of France. And the reason why it's considered an isolate is because we still don't know whether it belongs to any other families, meaning that we don't have evidence that there is any genetic relationship with other languages in the world. So they've done lots of research about, why is it Basque so different from other languages in Europe? Does it connect to Hungarian, which is also different in many ways? And the answer is no. So for now, we actually don't know necessarily where we come from. Or that's what people seem to say. Others suggest that we're actually one of the first settlers of Europe. Obviously, this kind of hypothesis has had a huge impact on how Basque people identify as well. Whether they claim themselves to be from there, how authentic we are, how old we are, how much we belong there, and stuff like that. So that's what Basque is. And Basque is spoken by about 700,000 people. And it is spoken both in the Spanish side and in the French side, although there are more speakers in the Spanish side because it's a little bit bigger. The territory is a little bit bigger. But Basque was spoken in a bigger territory than what is spoken right now. So it has been shrinking throughout the centuries. So one of the interesting characteristics about Basque that make it different, maybe per se, with other European languages has to do with the word order. So we tend to say, if I want to say that I saw somebody, right, we want to say, somebody saw, so we put the verb at the very end. And this has been something that Basque people try to also exoticize as something unique about languages. But then when we look at different languages in the world, we notice that this word order pattern is actually more common than we think. So then Basque people said, so we are not as unique as we thought. Okay. Right.
So I'm hearing that there's like a lot of pride with speaking Basque.
Absolutely. So it's actually, so I grew up speaking Basque at home and also Spanish. And it was actually a way of identifying yourself as an authentic member of the community. So, and obviously this is something that is still going on. And the fact that we need to maintain the language, one of the oldest languages in Europe. This is a big belief within the Basque community that we have been able to maintain our language and our culture, even if we have been invaded by many, many people. And oftentimes we talk about this invasion that also speaks to the current political situation. And obviously this is my side of the story. This is not the only side of the Basque story, but there is a huge pride, especially in terms of wanting to maintain the language, wanting to continue. And this is a big part of our culture. This idea of continuation, of generation to generation transmission is something that definitely takes a big load on our identity as authentic members of the community, and also wanting to maintain that history. We don't want to be defied. We want to be there. And one of the stereotypes, and obviously this is a stereotype, that Basque people are stubborn. So And this is something that in first works about descriptions that we have about Basque people. One of the main descriptions is that they are so stubborn that they're not willing to give up their language. My question is, who do want to give up their language, right?
Right.
So it's not a matter
Right.
of a stubborn; it's a matter of wanting to keep yourself alive. And Basque people do take pride in that aspect, the fact that it's so ancient and that we're still there and we're still wanting to be there.
Yeah.
So what is the political background of, let's say, Spain? Like how is Basque situated within the Spanish speaking country of Spain?
Right. So the contact between Basque and Spanish is as long as Spanish ever existed, because Basque was already there even before the Latin Julius Caesar and his friends came into the Basque territory. So going back into a little bit of more recent political situation. So I will start a little bit with, I would say, ever since the border between Spain and France was created along the Pyrenees, that is not necessarily the first diversification of the Basque country, but it was actually one of the most important ones. The fact that Spain and France became two different countries, the Basques became politically very divided in that respect. There was this boundary in terms of nation states. So looking at it more from a more recent perspective. So Basque has been spoken there for a long time. And obviously, the contact with French and Spanish has also influenced the way those varieties have evolved, right? So we do have a lot of Spanish words. We do mix a lot. The sounds, even the sounds. So if you are in the Spanish side of the Basque country, you know that you're in the Spanish side because some of the sounds are very similar to Spanish. And when you're in the French area, is the same. There is a lot of French sounding sounds, but there's still some other sounds that are unique to the Basque language as well. So then within the Spanish side, so we had the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936, and this had a huge impact on the Basque population, because the town of Guernica, very famous town of Guernica, that was a cultural center for Basques. The Basque Parliament was there, was bombed in 1937, and then after after the Civil War, the dictatorship lasted for 40 years up to 1975, until the dictator Franco died. So the language was prohibited. So you couldn't speak the language. Otherwise, you could be taken to jail or you could be killed. And that's what happened to many Basque poets, writers, that they still wrote in Basque. Obviously, there was a huge loss of Basque speakers during that time, because they started to be not spoken or not transmitted. Although in some areas of the Basque country right now, the dialects also died out before then. But in this respect, the dictatorship did have a huge impact on maintaining the language. But many people actually started to maintain it at home or in clandestine, so hiddenly, right? And this was very, very common. And then in 1975, when the dictator died, well, there was a transition period towards democracy, and then in 1979, democracy started to happen. So this is where the Basque Autonomous Community was created, and where the Basque Parliament was also created, the Basque government, and this wasn't the first time where Basque became co-official with the Spanish language, but only in this territory, and is comprised by three provinces: the Biscayan, the Guipuzcoan, and the Araba. And this is where most speakers of Basque are located today as well, especially in the Biscayan and the Guipuzcoan region. And so later on, after Basque became co-official in the Basque Autonomous Community, this was part of the constitution. And later on, so my parents moved to a very Basque-speaking region, which is a semi-rural area. It's called Guernica. This is where the bombing occurred. And this is where I was born, and this is where my sister was also born. And we spoke Basque at home. My parents would only speak to us in Basque, but they would speak to us the standard variety. So supposedly I am a native speaker of standard Basque, but right now I have to admit that I don't speak standard Basque fluently. I can read and write in standard Basque, but I cannot fluently speak it. There is always some influence of my regional dialects because Guernica did have a variety there before the standardization of Basque. So this is just a little bit of the background. I mean, I think I could go on and on and on, but yeah.
That was perfect. Thank you. Is anyone monolingual in Basque?
Actually, not that we know of. So maybe there are a couple or a handful of speakers in very isolated areas, but it's very, very, very hard to find a monolingual speaker of Basque. And even if they say that they're monolingual, they probably understand some Spanish or French. So I do have friends that have told me that, oh my goodness, my grandma, I don't think she doesn't speak a word of Spanish. This is in the Navarre mountains, in very isolated areas. And I said, are you sure she doesn't know any Spanish? Well, she doesn't speak a word. She would never respond to you in Spanish. And I asked her, do you think she understands? And she says, well, I don't know. Maybe she pretends not to understand it, right? So it could be that there are a handful of speakers, but it would not be possible to navigate the area if you don't know the other language as well. Although there are areas in which Basque is spoken almost by everybody, and age has a huge impact, right? There are some zones in which are considered more bilingual than others, and this has to do with the regions where Basque was already spoken before the standardization. Those areas maintain a quite high degree of bilingualism with Spanish or with French, but in more urban areas, even if the presence of Basque has increased, compared to other rural regions, is spoken by less people. Absolutely. So I never met a monolingual speaker of Basque. I would love to if there are any, but I doubt that if there is any, there would be in very remote areas.
I wonder if this hypothetical grandma who says that she doesn't speak any Spanish, is it because of pride? Is there a tension between Basque and Spanish?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. There is tension between the Spanish and Basque, or at least historically there has been some tension between the Spanish and Basque. Also, there's tensions within different varieties of Basque or different types of speakers of Basque. So it could be that this hypothetical grandma is hostile for all the for the war that she probably had to endure. The fact that she probably had family members killed. She probably had to fight for her survival. So this is also a way to show that she's not ready to submit herself to such a horrendous cultural genocide, right? So it could be contributing to her pride. It could be contributing to who she is now because of the historical events in her life, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask a question about so the situation of Basque in France versus the situation of Basque in Spain? Is there a difference? Is it the same?
Right. Yes. There are some similarities and some differences. The major difference is that Basque is not official with French. So the French Constitution only takes French as the official language of the state. French is the language of France, right? And that has had an impact because in the French Basque Country, language shift has gone more rapidly, meaning that more and more speakers have shifted to the dominant language in French a lot faster than they did in the Spanish area. However, recently, or relatively recently, at least in the last decade, France has allowed or has given permission to be able to teach these regional languages, and not only in the Basque Country but in other areas, as long as their French is not being affected, meaning that they need to show that they are also fluent of French speakers. So there is also a consortium of Ikastola. So Ikastola is a Basque word for Basque schools. It means the place of learning. And there are lots of Ikastolas in the French Basque Country as well in the Spanish Basque Country, in which there is immersion programs in which kids can go and speak and learn Basque if they don't learn it at home, or to be able to be literate in Basque. And then there is also something that they call Sheaska, which is also the highest school in the French Basque Country, and this is located in the Bayona area, which is the capital of the French Basque Country. It's the biggest city in there. It's about 40,000 people, right? And there are lots of kids that go there and learn Basque. But like in the United States, the immersion programs in which everything is being taught in Basque, and also they do have French as a subject, so that they're also literate in French. It starts to die out, meaning that later on French is more dominant even in the studies, right? But today there are highly bilingual. There are lots of people that are highly bilingual, but you can still see that the French is a dominant language as well in the French Basque Country. Interestingly enough, I have also done research on identity issues, language maintenance, language contact in both sides of the border. So one of the things that I noticed when I was there in the French Basque Country, in the Bayonne area, is that young people, there is a huge movement of young people wanting to maintain their language, right? They speak it, they celebrate it, there are lots of activism, there are radio stations, right? It's a way to put consciousness to the speakers. And obviously there is also mixture between French and Basque. And one of the things that I did notice there, as opposed to the Spanish side, is that everybody who is able to speak Basque, not everybody, but a large body of speakers who can speak Basque fluently or semi-fluently or whatever that means, they actually make a huge effort, right? This is different from other urban areas in the Spanish side of the Basque Country, in the sense that in Bilbao, young people, especially if you're younger than 25 or even 30, it's very likely that you learned Basque in school through immersion programs. But then that language is not being transmitted to the streets. So this is something that we call reversal language shift. Whereas before the standardization, Basque was the language of the home. Now, for many urban areas in the Spanish Basque Country, Basque is the language of the schooling. And then they would go home and they would speak Spanish, maybe because their parents don't speak the Spanish. So there is a notorious change in how Basque is being used and how it's being transmitted. That has an impact on the transmission and the I would say the vitality of the language. So I even interviewed young Basque French speakers and who actually wanted to go study abroad in the Basque Country. This is actually hilarious because they're going to study abroad in their own Basque-speaking territory, but it's abroad because the countries divide, the borders divide us, right? And he was telling me how disappointed he was when he was studying in Bilbao for a year. That one of the reasons why he wanted to go there is because he wanted to have the education in Basque. He was studying engineering, and he wanted to be able to study engineering in Basque. And when he was there, he said, yes, all classes were in Basque. But he was surprised to find out that there are lots of young people of his age that they actually use more Spanish in their daily life interactions. And he was very disappointed and sad to see that. So one of the questions is, why do we see these divergent patterns, right? And I would say that one of the reasons that I have in mind is that I feel that in the French Basque country, they probably feel more oppressed because their language, the Basque language, doesn't have at least any, I mean, it's recognized as existing, but it's not necessarily being guaranteed by the government, meaning that they have to work really hard to be able to have it in the schools. Whereas in the Spanish side of the Basque country, this is given to us. The government has worked really hard for us to be able to have access, so we kind of assume that we're going to have that access too, right? Obviously there are other factors that contribute, but I would say that is probably a big issue, or a big potential explanation for that. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And the French situation sounds very similar to the situation of Spanish in the US to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it has some similarities and some differences too, right? So in terms of the similarities is that the French Basque country, so the government does not necessarily support the schools, right? So they have to work hard for it. It's the same in the United States too, in the sense that all these languages that are not English, if they want to maintain them, the families have to work really hard. The school system has to, there is a bottom up approach, in the sense that the society gets involved in how they could provide these linguistic resources for their kids, like literacy, so that they can maintain the language. So in that respect, it's very, very similar, right? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, are Basque speakers discriminated against in either Spain or France, or?
Oh, yes. Well, we can start even with the Constitution itself, right? And obviously, I don't think everybody would agree with me with what I'm saying right now, but so one of the beliefs is that, oh yes, Basque now is being acknowledged by the Spanish government because Article 2 of the Constitution says that Basque is also co-official with Spanish. So Article 2 says that every Spaniard has the duty to know Spanish. But then Article 2.1 says that other Spanish languages, so for instance, Galician in Galicia, Catalan in Catalonia, or Basque in the Basque country, have the right to be able to use it, right? So in that respect, these regional languages are considered lower in that respect, meaning that you also need to know Spanish, but not the other way around. So when you go to Madrid, and if I wanna have kids, and I move to Madrid with my partner, I can't ensure that my kids are gonna maintain the language, right? So in that respect, the Spanish Constitution does not protect me as a Basque speaker or as a citizen of Spain. So in that respect, I do feel that there is a huge gap there of, yes, we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. So also in terms of nationalism, so there is oftentimes a belief that the only nationalist regions are the ones that speak another language other than Spanish. But there is also Spanish nationalism, right? And this also has to do with power issues, in the sense that nobody questions the knowledge of Spanish, but everybody keeps asking you, so, but why do you speak Basque? And I said, well, why do you speak Spanish?
Yeah. Yep.
Right? So then other types of discrimination also have to do with politics. So language and politics have been very entrenched in the Basque country and in Spain. So when terrorism in the Basque country and in Spain was at its peak by ETA, terrorist group, or so oftentimes when these people were being convicted, they had the right to have a hearing or a trial that was in Basque, but that right was not given to them, right? So in that respect, we do have some issues of language discrimination. And obviously, acts of terrorism are the most punishable ones in Spain. And language has had an impact in how those people are also being treated. There was also a law passed in the 90s, and this is when the peak of terrorism was there, in which Basque, so members of ETA would be taken to jails farther away from their families in the Basque country. And when families would go and visit them, many were Spanish speakers only, but many also were Basque speakers. And the language of the home was always Basque. So many Basque families would go and visit their relatives who were in prison, and the Spanish policemen would not allow them to speak Basque so that they could understand what they're talking about. So I do have, yeah, it was. So my dad is a school teacher, and he's about to retire in actually next week because today is his birthday.
Well, congratulations to your dad.
Yeah. And so he taught Basque, even if he's not a native speaker of Basque. He was a Basque teacher in a small school where Basque is spoken by 95% of the population there. And he had a student as a kid because he taught primary school. And he had a student that she was born in jail because both of her parents were taken to jail, to prison for certain acts that they committed or whatever. And so she grew up with her grandma, and oftentimes she would go visit her parents, and there were moments in which she said, I'd rather go back home than speak in Spanish to my parents.
Wow.
So sometimes they would go visit them to the other side of Spain in Andalusia and say, well, and that's a 12-hour drive. So let's go back because I can't communicate in a language. It's a foreign language to us, right? That doesn't mean that we hate Spanish, but it's the language of love, and we are being not allowed to use it. So there has been issues of discrimination at that level. Absolutely.
That reminds me, just very recently, there was a man who speaks Hawaiian and English, because of course everyone also speaks English in Hawaii, but he speaks both Hawaiian and English, and one of the official languages of Hawaii is Hawaiian. And he tried to use Hawaiian in the courtroom, and the judge just refused to let him use this language. And anyway, the whole situation was very upsetting, because if it's an official language, you should be able to have a trial in your own language. That's how I feel as a Canadian, where that is the law.
Absolutely. The way the Spanish law would respond to that would say, oh, but Basque is not an official language in Madrid. And these acts were being convicted in the Audiencia Nacional, or with the Supreme Court in Madrid, right? But still, you do have the right to have a translator.
Right.
If that is the case, right? You should have the right to express yourself in any language that you feel comfortable with, because you're being convicted. So, yeah, I mean...
Yeah, if there's any time when you should have your right to your language, it's definitely in a trial, because the heavy hammer of the law, you need to be protected.
Absolutely. And I have examples myself. I mean, oftentimes I have to admit that I take a lot of pride in my Basque language. And as a social linguist, I also play with power dynamics a lot. So when I go to Madrid, maybe for, a layover so that I fly back to Chicago or something like that. So sometimes they look at my passport and they're like, obviously, they look at my last name and it's like, oh, Rodriguez, she's a Spaniard, Spanish passport. But then they look at my name, and my name is written with a TX, which is also very symbolic of the Basque language. And they're like, oh, so you are Basque. And they make comments. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, that should not be a surprise, right? Why is it that I have to know more about you than you know about me? So now, every time I have a layover in Madrid, I speak in English to everybody. And, they think I'm American because my accent, they cannot notice my foreign accent, right? I speak more fluent English. They think that I am American. And then when I show my passport, they say, but you're a Spaniard. Why do you speak to us in English? And I said, why not? I feel more comfortable in English than I speak in Spanish. I said, but you are a Spaniard. I said, I'm not a Spaniard, right? I didn't pick my citizenship. And, and I said, well, I use English because this is an international airport. So at the same time, I'm trying to give a lesson. And here I'm too idealistic of what it means to speak an imperial language. So
Yeah.
I am using another imperial language to show what it feels like to be imposed a language. I don't think my social linguistics lessons in the airport work that well, but
probably not, but it's worth a shot.
Yeah.
But hopefully they go home and think about, oh, this weird girl.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, but it makes me feel better about myself.
Would you actually say, is it true that your English is, you feel your English is better than your Spanish?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so you're, okay. Okay, so that's a lie. All right.
No. Well, I would say that, I mean, in order to talk about certain topics, I would say that I feel better speaking in English. Right. So if I have to talk about linguistic issues, I think my English is stronger in that respect. Yeah. I have to think harder to find vocabulary in the Spanish. And so in that respect, I do think.
Yeah.
And I also sometimes I forget words in the Spanish as well. And then I'm thinking, am I losing my Spanish? But then it activates very quickly. But it is not uncommon to forget certain words.
Yeah, so that's definitely something multilingual people worry about, right? Is, am I losing X or am I losing, it's part of your identity, right?
Yes.
It's so I wonder, how do you identify when you think of all the languages you speak and such?
I feel Basque. I feel very Basque. However, I feel very conflicted because I don't use Basque very often because I don't have anybody around me to speak it with. So at the same time, I have to admit that I have developed an identity of an English speaker too, right? Also because my most immediate loving person is an English speaker, right? So I speak English with my partner. And but at the same time, I feel very Basque, and the more farther away I am, and the longer I remain in this country, in the United States, I feel more Basque, actually. And I'm starting to realize that I'm becoming part of a diaspora myself.
Yeah.
Which is something that is very common after you leave home for a long time, right? Although I still have strong ties with my homeland, right? And then those issues of discrimination also transcend into the host country. So interestingly enough, so my father still feels very discriminated against in the hometown that I grew up in. For instance, he is the result of a big migration of monolingual Spanish speakers from Spain into the Basque Country that happened in the 60s. So my grandfather moved to the Basque Country, to Bilbao, to the big city of Bilbao, for work. And my dad was 10 years old or so when he moved there. And then he learned Basque, but he learned a standard Basque. And then he moved with my mom to this small town, Guernica, that has a large population of Spanish migrants, but at the same time, very, very Basque-rooted culture and a regional dialect. So oftentimes they would comment on his Basque that people would say, oh, it's interesting to see a Spaniard speak Basque, right? But at the same time, your Basque is different from us. You didn't learn it at home. You are not one of us, right?
Yeah.
So I remember interviewing my father and asking him, you lived in the Basque Country for longer than you have lived in Spain or monolingual Spain. And I said, do you feel Basque? And he would respond to me. He said, it doesn't matter how I feel because everybody else would make me feel like an outsider.
Yeah.
And that was very tough to hear because my parents did everything they could. First, they have been big proponents of revitalization of the Basque language. They have played a huge role, people like them. And there are lots of people that praise them for that. But my dad still doesn't feel that he belongs there, mainly because of his ethnicity or because the way he also speaks. And then I asked him, how do you compensate for that? What have you done have you tried hard? And he said, oh, absolutely. So for him, being Basque is what we in social linguistics call doing Basque, because identity is a constant process of working towards it. We're constantly practicing our identities, whether they're conscious or unconscious. And my dad has been very conscious about it. He always wanted to construct his Basqueness through different practices. So, for instance, he goes to lots of Basque ritualistic events. He volunteers for teaching Basque to other immigrants. He also engages there is a cycling club, and cycling also has a strong connection with Basque identity. So he's invested in capturing kids to do sports that are connected with the Basque country and mountains and those kind of things.
It's so hard to hear, just because I mean, it's all the same, right? The linguistic discrimination across the world.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, oh, what's happening in the Basque country is what's happening in the U.S. for people that don't speak English or who want to keep their mother tongue.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that these patterns of discrimination, there's a lot of similarities, and it has to do with issues of power, but how those power relations are being established obviously has the consequences come from the historical events as well, right? So how is it that Basque speakers are being discriminated against within the Basque country? Because that also happens, right? So in my own research, I'm able to show, so one of the questions that I seek to ask is, so the revitalization of the Basque language has been considered one of the most successful ones in Europe. Why? Because we went from only few speakers would speak it, but after the standardization of Basque and the co-officiality with the Spanish and the implementation of Basque in the schools, would it say that young people, 90% of the young population, and by young we mean 30 or 35 years old or younger, can actually speak Basque. They're competent speakers of Basque and Spanish. Obviously, there are varying degrees, but they have gone to school, immersion programs in Basque, and the government has done huge work on being able for Basque people to have those resources. But the use of Basque has remained quite stable. There has been some gains, meaning that maybe we had an increase of 5% or 10%. And obviously this varies in terms of region. So one of the questions that I seek to ask in my research is that why is it that the use of Basque remains low compared to the gains of the many bilinguals, or all the gains in bilingual speakers that we have been able to obtain? And one of the answers that we have, it has to do with identity issues. So many speakers who learn Basque from early on, they learn the standard Basque variety in the school. They start as early as 3 years old. So, but they don't consider themselves native speakers of the language. Even if they're very, very fluent, they still consider themselves non-native speakers. And because of the ideologies or the mother tongue ideology, they also believe that they're not authentic enough because they haven't learned it at home. So that's one of the issues that is happening right now. And also, how is it that contact with the Spanish and the contact features or grammatical aspects that I incorporate in the Spanish contributes to their lack of authenticity or actual authenticity? And here it's very interesting because we see a pattern in which if you learned a regional variety of Basque and you use the Spanish words, it's okay because you are considered an authentic member of society, of the Basque-speaking community, because it's implied that you have learned the language at home. Although it's not necessarily the case, right? But it implies that oftentimes. But what happens when somebody who speaks standard Basque actually uses Spanish words in it, or code switches, meaning that they change they say a sentence in Spanish and then another one in Basque, it actually contributes to their lack of authenticity. So many of the people that I interviewed, they ask me, why is it that I'm not allowed to mix languages when all those people who are very authentic are able to do it? Mm-hmm. And they're very aware that if they want to mix the language, which is common when you're learning a language, you should do it with the regional varieties. So actually, one of the things that is being suggested by other social linguists in the Basque Country is that we should promote varieties in the classroom as well, so that these speakers could have access to that authenticity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so hopefully that will pan out, but we will see.
Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is there anything that you want our listeners to take away from this about Basque? Let me tell you what I took away. I just had no idea that people would refer to themselves as Basque. Like, I knew the Basque language existed. I didn't think about it as an ethnicity. I just didn't think. So
yes, and it's interesting that because one last thing that I would like to say is that we have different labels for different types of Basque. So, for instance, we call Euskaldun Zahar, which means old speaker of Basque, but that has nothing to do with age. That means that you probably learned the language at home. You probably speak a regional variety. Old speaker of Basque means free standardization, right? Whereas Euskaldun Berri, which means Euskal means Basque, Berri means new, which means that you are a new Basque, right? And you probably speak the standard variety, so you are from a different era. And now so social linguists are starting to think, should we use these terms? How racial is it? Even if it's about language, it also brings into question issues of ethnicity and linguistic properties, right? And authenticity. So, but this also happens in the United States and in everywhere, right? With Hispanics, what does it mean to be Hispanic? What does it mean to be Latino? What does it mean to be Chicano? What does it mean to be other / American, right? And these kind of diversifications that are obviously socially constructed,
right,
constantly. So we do have that in the Basque Country too.
Of course. Wow.
Yeah. So I do feel very Basque, and I have to admit that I wouldn't say that I take pride in it. Maybe some people would say, oh my God, you're so stubborn. And I say, well, when your identity is being questioned all the time, you're going to be stubborn.
Yeah. There's the pull quote.
Yep, exactly. It's so true.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are a lot of people that feel exactly as you do about that.
Yeah. Why do I have to explain myself?
Yes.
All the time.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us. This was great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was super exciting.
Yeah.
And as we always say, don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
Bye.
Bye.
Agur, agur. That's the word for goodbye in Basque. Agur.
Oh.
Agur.
Agur.
Bye.
Agur. Bye. Bye.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by Chris Ayres for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com.